First of all, good morning, everybody. And my name is Ito Peng, and I am the professor at the sociology department at the University of Toronto, and also the director of the Center for Global Social Policy here at the sociology department. I know that there are sort of only about a handful of people keep attending this talk seminar in person, but there are about 35 people registered online. So I think it's more virtual than in person, but it's a very nice group. So with that, let me first start with the land acknowledgement. So let me start with that. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Mississaugas of the Credit nations. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across the Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So with that, let me now introduce you the presenter for this seminar. Alexa Carson is my favorite, my former PhD. Alexa Carson has a PhD in sociology at the University of Toronto. She graduated earlier this year. Yes, right. Her SSHRC and OGS funded dissertation was entitled "Looking After Our Seniors: How Immigrant and Non-Immigrant Families in Canada Experience and Make Sense of Later Life Care." She was awarded 2023 Margaret Clark Best Graduate Student Paper Prize by the Association for Anthropology, Gerontology, and the Life Course group. Alexa's expertise cross-cuts the sociological areas of aging, family care, migration, social policy, and qualitative research. She has presented at numerous national and international conferences and recent peer-reviewed publications. These include, I'm not going to name all of them, but just a couple of the more recent ones. A paper on rethinking intergenerational living as the ideal form of senior care, really the life course approach research with immigrant families in Toronto in Journal of Anthropology and Aging, that was published in 2024 and 2023. She also published Pressure Release Valve, South Korean long-term care policy as supplementary to family elder care on Journal of Aging and Social Policy. Now, Alexa worked with the Center for Global Social Policy in various capacities from 2019 to 2024. She was the lead research assistant for the Canada team of the Care Economies in Context projects from 2022 to 24. So she comes with a lot of experience and research work. And with that, I would like to ask Alexa to present this seminar. Maybe you could present for 35 to 40 minutes and we'll break for question and answer. Okay, Alexa.
Hey, thank you so much, Ito, for the land acknowledgement and warm introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here today with you all in this in-person and virtual space. Thank you for joining us. It's exciting to present as part of the Care Economies in Context speaker series. This is a co-authored paper with Dr. Ito Peng, which she didn't mention humbly, entitled "Care Peaks, Plateaus, and Loops: Narrative Insights on Stress from Family Caregivers for Seniors." So as many in this space will be well aware of, there are increasing concerns about how we in Canada and beyond will be able to provide later life care to those who need it in the coming years. As populations age, family caregivers are increasingly picking up the slack in the face of inadequate public services and other social crises, including rising costs of living, unaffordable housing, and precarious work. While feminist scholars have long drawn attention to how social reproductive care is both feminized and undervalued, in this research we attend to and remind that this devaluation is often particularly hidden and invisible when it comes to unpaid care for seniors. There's multiple reasons for that I can't get into just at this stage, but overall, this senior care very often happens in the home or supporting people in long-term care. And it's often not counted or well tracked in employment and economic data because of its unpaid, invisible, and home-based nature. This is changing. There is increasing recognition about the importance of paying attention to and doing research on unpaid care, but we're hoping to contribute to that and just noting that this is a bit of a research gap. And in terms of the rationale, reminding that over 20% of Canadians provide unpaid care for care-dependent adults, which actually is a far larger proportion than the paid care providers for this group. It's not saying, of course, paid care providers may well provide more hours because it's their full-time jobs, and their work is incredibly important, as we'll see in terms of their contributions to care throughout this work. But we just sort of, in our rationale and context, reminding that this is a growing problem in Canada, a growing social issue, and one that needs more attention. And then furthermore, there are intersectional implications with evidence of heightened burdens for unpaid racialized and immigrant women, as well as those of lower socioeconomic status. And that will be definitely highlighted in this presentation. So within this rationale and context, and based on growing evidence of negative impacts of caregiver work-life balance and mental health of care, we ask the following research questions. How do unpaid caregivers for seniors narrate their experiences of stress? And what can these stories tell us about how caregivers make sense of their care journeys? Our framing is bringing together some diverse and often not sort of addressed or thought of together as theoretical framing. And I think that'll become evident throughout the presentation. The first is drawing from and building on conceptualizations of the stress process model, which were developed by Pearlin and collaborators in the 1990s. And just briefly, the stress process model, which I'll sometimes refer to as SPM, considers that and understands caregiver stress as tending to or being more likely to increase over time when not mediated by buffers. And this model also distinguishes between primary and secondary stressors, with primary stressors being stress related to the direct caregiving role, such as physical strains, and secondary stressors caused more indirectly, such as lost leisure time or work-life conflicts. And these primary and secondary stressors are theorized, and there's quite a lot of evidence that shows that they together build and contribute to longer-term stress, anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges for caregivers. And so we build on and we draw from this SPM in this research. And as a qualitative project, we're also bringing in insights from life course theory and feminist political economic theory. Life course theory pays attention to interconnected lives, timing, transitions, and agency. And feminist political economics pays attention to and understands care as a relationship. So together, this framing, we argue, helps us to propose and move forward a more relational, nonlinear conceptualization of caregiver stress. The data for this component of the research project that I'll be sharing findings from today is comprised of 57 semi-structured interviews for family caregivers for seniors. This is a component of the Care Economies in Context project, which is led by Principal Investigator Ito Peng. And the bigger project is an international mixed methods project investigating care for seniors and children in 9 countries across 5 global regions. This particular data set is from the Canada data collection for the Care Economies in Context project. We spoke with 57 participants from across Canada. And these interview respondents were, and this is a key methodological strength that I'll sort of delve into a little bit, were recruited as follow-up to a large and nationally representative survey that was conducted the year before in August 2022. Which was also obviously part of the Care Economies and Context project. And although qualitative research, of course, cannot argue to be, and in fact is not intended to be representative, sampling and recruiting from a nationally representative large end survey really helped us to speak to a broad range of people from across Canada who are, and I'll get into some demographic descriptors on the next slide. But it enabled us to both randomly and purposefully recruit. So the recruitment took place in 3 waves. And we first approached, I should note it's very important that at the end of the large end survey, we of course asked participants if they would be interested in being contacted later for a follow-up interview. And over 50% replied yes, which is quite a high percentage of that. And so from that 50%, we were able to first randomly recruit, and then in subsequent waves, purposefully recruit for participants who, informed by literature and our understanding of the care, and of course, guided by Dr. Peng, we sort of were looking for a diverse group of people demographically, and also in terms of care needs and whether people were living with care representative, what the recipients. And so we really were able to get this quite broad and very diverse sample of Canadians looking after seniors. Interviews were virtual with a very small handful of phone interviews for those who indicated that Zoom was a barrier. And they were conducted by 4 graduate student researchers, including myself, Azubi and Belen, who are joining us today. And this was done in 2 languages as well, too, in both French and English. A little bit more on our data. Everybody who self-identified in the original survey as a main unpaid caregiver of a person 65 years or older who required daily support with daily activities due to long-term health conditions, disabilities, or problems due to aging. Most respondents were adult children, children-in-law, or spouses. But we had 1 niece, 1 sister, and 2 friends or neighbors in the sample as well, too. The sample was 63% female, 32 were living with a care recipient, 68 had some form of formal services, and this ranged quite widely. It ranged from a few hours of either private or publicly funded home care a week, up to those living in very supported long-term care or private retirement facilities, and everything in between. So we really had quite a range of care needs and care services within the sample. 19% identified as a visible minority. Participants were from across Canada, with 6 interviews in French, all from respondents in Quebec, and 51 in English. The sample was, unsurprisingly, because of the population on the older side, 33% in their 40s and 50s, and 61% over 60 years old. And that is quite an old sample in terms of age, and some implications of that will be discussed in the findings in subsequent slides. Our interviews were semi-structured. They ranged from 50 to 120 minutes. That's quite a large range. On average, it was about 70 to 80 minutes. And as we were 4 interviewers, we paid a lot of attention to consistency in the interviewing process. A key step in that was a very detailed interview guide. And these guides were thematically organized in the following themes of interest: household configurations, care arrangements and times of caregiving, conditions of care and decision-making, and experiences and thoughts of care arrangements. And as we sort of progressed in the interview, we moved from questions related to sort of the day-to-day stories of care. And then as the rapport was developed, we're able to delve into often more challenging and difficult subjects, such as impacts and burdens of caregiving, often concluding interviews with policy recommendation questions. Although these interview guides were quite detailed and collaboratively very carefully constructed, we also followed qualitative principles of allowing for conversations to flow naturally and offering ample time and space in the interviews for follow-up prompts. Part of our methodology was sort of founded on bi-weekly meetings as a research team. And this was over a 1.5 year long process. And in that, we were really able, as research assistants, guided by PI and other members of the research team, to really get a good sense of the research goals, the research questions, the literature, and watch for themes as the interview developed. We followed qualitative principles by memo writing. About within a week of each interview, memos were written and shared with the interview team, who read each other's. And then within our bi-weekly meetings, we discussed whether certain questions weren't working well, whether there were particular themes that were important to continue to explore more deeply. And in that way, we were able to sort of strike this balance between consistency between 4 different graduate student researchers and the sort of natural way that a conversation evolves differently for each researcher, and really able to create that space. And this is also built on the foundation of feminist political economic methodologies, which stress for the focus on everyday stories of care. Our analytical process was very similarly multi-phased, inductive, and collaborated, guided by these same FPE principles. After having this collection of interview memos, which had identified our key themes of interest based on research goals and literature, we then developed a detailed list of coding and began the sort of laborious, inductive, sometimes messy, often very generative process of qualitative coding. Again, our bi-weekly meetings were a cornerstone of consistency and generative insights. We were constantly questioning each other, or how are we interpreting these codes? How are we applying these codes? Tweaking them if we needed to. We checked or sort of had 21% of the interviews transcripts that were coded checked by a second coder, just to sort of verify our interpretations. Yeah, overall, it was a very generative and productive process. And I think it's because it's not a 12 minutes conference presentation, as a longer seminar, I have a chance to really speak about those methodologies, which I think are key strengths in terms of both our methods and then how we get to our findings and contributions in this project. A very quick overview of the findings, and then I'll go into more illustrative detail on each of them. The SPM model, as I've spoken about briefly, it posits that caregiver stress tends to increase over time if not mediated by buffers. And while this was certainly the case for some respondents, who I'll speak about a little bit later, we started to identify that it was less so for others, which inspired us to investigate why. And in this, we identified 2 nonlinear, non-mutually exclusive care narrative patterns. The first we call stress peaks and plateaus, and the second, care loops. So I'll speak about each of these in a little more depth, as well as moving on to paying some attention to the inequities in caregiver stress, which is a third important finding of this research. The first finding is peaks and plateaus. And so, we think of this kind of in this illustrative way. of stress, not necessarily moving in the nonlinear, in a linear pattern of building over time. What we really identified was for the majority of our participants, heightened stress during periods of crisis and transition. This could be crisis and transition for the senior, so a fall, a new health condition, or for the caregiver, lost job, a move, a child. And that was a very stressful time for participants, but they were often able to move through the care stress to a more sustainable place. And this is important for a few reasons. I'll actually just sort of take a step back and read this quote from Leslie as an illustrative example of this finding. Leslie is in her 60s, caring for a 96-year-old mother with dementia who had previously been living at home and had more recently moved to a private assisted living facility. Leslie says, it was getting really stressful with her. She would get all anxious at night. She'd go wandering around the neighborhood trying to find somebody. Oh, it was stressful. And it became really stressful with her medication as well. So yeah, it's definitely much better now. I can sleep at night knowing she is, somebody's looking after her 24 hours a day. So a few takeaways from Leslie's example, as well as the finding more generally, which is, as previously mentioned, caregivers in this pattern were able to find a way past the more stressful situation to something that they were able to identify as more sustainable. However, the experience, and this is a key contribution, I think, of this finding, that these stressful moments, they didn't disappear. They weren't gone from caregivers' lives. They were almost like a background hum. Caregivers were often left a bit apprehensive, aware that exigencies of aging would mean that what was currently manageable could well become unmanageable again in the future. And so this is where life course theory, I think, really brings in some additional contributions here, in that these peaks and plateaus kind of non-linear and a little bit unpredictable. The next finding is about this concept that we're coining called care loops. Care loops presented as sequential multiple care. We were interested in multiple care in this research. There's a lot of research in care literature on multiple care for younger cohorts, often called the sandwich generation. Has become kind of a hot and very important topic in care literature. Sandwich generation is often conceptualized and represented by younger adults, often parents with young children or teenage children who are caring for seniors, perhaps in their 70s and 80s. And so we were interested in this concept as part of our bigger contribution to care scholarship. And multiple care was a question that we asked in the interviews. But what really came out of it is that we didn't, and this was, again, as I said, there's implications of the age of our sample. We didn't have a lot of sandwich generation participants in our sample, but we had this instead. We had 40% of our sample who had cared for or were caring for more than one senior. This has implications in that care scholarship has tended to focus on multiple care in one temporal moment. So those caring, as I said, for young children and seniors at the same time. And there hasn't been really much attention to this pattern, which is those caring for parents, often parents. There was a few caring for multiple seniors beyond their parents, also aunts and uncles as well too. But many people cared for two parents in a non-simultaneous way, so this sort of concurrent care. And not only, well, actually, no, I'll read Julie's quote because it illustrates the next part of this finding that's really crucial. My father lived for 3.5 years till he passed away at home. And by that, she means he was like really needing a lot of care for those last 3.5 years and palliative at home. And never died at home, never left the family. Continuing in Julie's words, at home, which was his wish. He did not want to go into long-term care. It changed the way that we decided what to do with my mom. To move her first before she ended up going into long-term. So going into independent and assisted living has kind of transitioned her without having to go into a long-term care facility, which she didn't really need at the time. And so what Giele and others who describe care loops highlighted to us is not only a recommendation that we have for future research to investigate this pattern a little bit further, like to see to what extent does this exist in the general population outside of our sample, that much multiple care is happening as non-concurrent care for seniors, but also from a theoretical perspective, the care loops concept really highlighted to us that the previous care experiences influenced how people thought about the second one and how people made decisions and experienced the second care or the third care in the case of those who cared for more than two. And sometimes these preceding care experiences were described as positive in the sense that they gave participants lessons learned, knowledge about service access and stress management that they were able to take forth into the second care situation, make it better or work better, or go more smoothly. And for others, there was a sense of caregiving exhaustion from the previous caregiving experience that they brought to the second one. And that really was often tied to feelings of reluctance to begin the journey again, tied to very fraught emotional and physical and mental health responses. So yeah, and I'll get a bit more into this in discussion, but this finding is really one that we're sort of, we're just advancing. It wasn't when we weren't really interested in this population, but they emerged from the data as one that has really been underrepresented, invisible, and understudied. So we really advocate for more attention to this group in the future. We really don't want anybody to walk away from this presentation thinking that everybody experiences peaks and plateaus. And this third finding is a crucial one as well, in sort of a contrast to the majority of our sample, who sort of presented to us this sort of peaks and plateaus, finding like having stressful times, but being able to cobble together unpaid and paid services and find themselves some sort of sustainable way forward. There was a minority of our sample that did not apply to at all. These are caregivers who were profoundly, deeply, and chronically stressed. Caregivers whose stories were incredibly difficult to hear and bear witness to and be part of and listen to. Some sort of commonalities we noticed in these caregivers were that they tended to be financially strained, of lower socioeconomic status, and be dealing with seniors with extremely complex care needs with chronic, that then contributed to chronic stress of the caregivers. And so this, can sound sort of obvious, but it's also just so important to acknowledge and bear witness to it, and never forget when we're sort of drawing attention to how others experience care stress, that there are these caregivers who are just struggling so much. So some takeaways from this is very much in line with the stress process conceptualizations. I'll just read you this quote from Barb, who I think exemplifies it so well. She was an Indigenous woman in her 60s in Northern Canada. She was caring for her husband in his late 60s who had a stroke and was paralyzed, needed an extremely high level of daily care. Barb was still working. She'd had to move houses and take out a new mortgage for an accessible home after her husband's stroke, and predicted she would be working well into her 70s as a result. She did have public care support because of the intenseness of her husband's care needs. But that public care support only lined up with her working hours. So she had a multiple sort of PSWs that she had to manage and throughout her Monday to Friday job. But as soon as her work ended, her second job began, and didn't end through the night, and didn't end on the weekends, and accessing respite in her remote community was very challenging. And so her quote here: "I don't have any self-care. I don't have any friends. I've got no one to talk to. I don't have any friends anymore. I gained a lot of weight because I'm not exercising." I think these are all from stress and difficulties, not really looking after myself. I think because my life is so stressful, I don't remember like I used to. So I forget things that are kind of important, which affects my work. And sometimes my relations with my coworkers because I can't remember. And so Barb was very aware of how she didn't call them this, but she was very clear that her primary stressors influenced her secondary stressors, which influenced, it's not in this quote, but influenced her mental health issues. She described depression. She had sought counseling for her mental health struggles, but didn't have the time to continue to go to her counseling. And so this story really reminds that of this intersection between lower financial strain, complex care needs, and a lack of social support from family, friends, or public services. And how these primary stressors, Barb had been injured in lifting her husband, so her shoulder injury contributed to her lack of ability to exercise. And the secondary stressors, such as housing insecurity and challenges with work-life balance, were augmented by a lack of moderators, just lack of support from other family and community, contributing to stress proliferation over time. And I'll speak in a minute about some takeaways and policy implications of this, of which there are obviously many. So in terms of contributions of this research from theoretical and empirical perspectives, the care loop concept helped to highlight that care is non-static, that it can be non-sequential. As I mentioned, that this non-sequential intervention is one that hasn't really been recognized in care literature. And I think there are implications for, and we have certainly recommendations for other scholarship on sort of paying attention to. I'd love to see this included in Statistics Canada data to see whether we track not only who you have cared for in the last year, but is there anyone you have cared for in the last 10 years as well for current caregivers, and perhaps some implications of that. Of course, memory recall in quantitative studies can be complicated, but it's something that we recommend to be considered in future scholarship. And then from a life course perspective, also that reminding that caregivers don't begin the caregiving journey as if it's day one in a relationship. It's built into a longer life story within the family and often shaped by prior caregiving experiences as well as anticipations for the future. And anticipations can be both hopes and they can be worries for the future as well too. And these findings help to attend to interrelated lives across and between generations, life events, and also bring in more attention to relationality and meaning making about care. Furthermore, although life course theory has offered a lot to this research, it's often critiqued as having too much focus on the individual. And so with awareness of that, we also brought in intersectional and feminist political economic framing to help shift perspectives to broader structural forces such as gender, socioeconomic status, and inadequate public services. As with all research, this has some limitations. I've talked a lot about strengths, but we were cognizant throughout the research that care-related stress, what we are studying, has also acted as a participation barrier. And so that is some very stressed caregivers may well have selected out of study participation due to lack of time and heavy mental load. So just want to acknowledge that. However, participants who identified in our large N survey in the year before our qualitative data collection, who identified as being very stressed or stressed in that large N survey, were not less likely to select yes to being willing to be contacted for a follow-up interview. And so that did show that there was sort of something in these very stressed participants that made it the time commitment worthwhile to them. Yes, we did offer a $20 President's Choice gift certificate, but actually in speaking with participants, I think for many of them, speaking about their stress was quite cathartic. A lot of people at the end of our interview said, thank you for doing this research. This is a really important subject. We are really glad that you're doing this, and the policy component of the fact that this was housed in the Center for Global Social Policy and that we have a commitment to making policy recommendations was, I think, very important to participants. And furthermore, the participation of some clearly very stressed respondents in the study, I think, can kind of speak to the fact that we were able to mitigate this limitation in some regard. However, we do recommend further longitudinal studies to measure kind of caregiver stress over time, which we were unable to do. There's a small longitudinal component in that we reviewed the surveys from the year before studying the interviews. So we were able to see if people sort of were describing their shift in stress over that 8-month period. But I would love to have been able to do another follow-up interview 2 years later. And that would help us, we think, to deepen knowledge on care experiences and meaning making, how that might change further along a care journey. And then, of course, as I've already mentioned, we would very much recommend and like to see more quantitative exploration of this sort of care loops concept of seeing like what's going on with people in their 60s who are caring for people in their 90s in a multiple care situation. Because of course, an aging population is often talked about, but it's also often thought about the boomers aging. But what we are seeing often now is not only that, but also the boomers caring for the super-aged. And that's often forgotten, like the kind of current care crisis. There's a lot of talk about the future one, the one we have to pay attention to later. But right now, what we were really seeing in our sample is, we were interested in caring for seniors, but many of our caregivers were seniors as well. And so what does that look like in terms of this demographic shift, and what are the implications for caregiver well-being, as well as quality care provision, of course. A few key takeaways and some policy considerations to end the presentation today. Our peaks and plateaus finding very clearly revealed to us the importance of timely interventions, that those matter greatly for caregiver well-being. This is important. It's not going to surprise anybody in the gerontology and aging and care space. We know this, but we have to keep saying it because our governments are not listening to us. So we need to reduce our wait lists for both home care and long-term care. We need to increase public care services, and ultimately, in a dream world, a blue sky thinking world, we'll hopefully sort of really have some sort of a national long-term care program where we really invest in long-term care. And what this research helps to identify is this is not just about seniors and later life care. This is also about the people who have to look after them and their family, and the caregivers who are experiencing stress and sacrificing well-being for family care. So this timely intervention sort of policy implication was very clear in that so many of our seniors, of our caregivers who were in this sort of peak stress period, it was during their wait list time. I was waiting for services. That was super stressful. Was trying to navigate all these systems. And we got out of it by getting our home care hours increased, by getting our long-term care spot. And what we really noticed here, and this sort of moves on to the next key point, is that those with financial resources were able to get out of those peaks of stress more quickly, because they would often supplement their care needs with private home care and with private institutional care, either instead of or while waiting for public care, which makes sense. Of course, we're going to do that. You spend the money when you need to for the people you love. However, this is not available to everyone. And for those who had to wait for their public home care, had to wait for their public long-term care spot, that peak of stress was longer, and they sometimes moved into our next group who experienced this chronic stress that they just simply couldn't get out of. Reminding that access to later life public care is an equity issue, and that sort of reminds, of course, that we sort of critique and recommend against this creeping privatization, underfunding, and deregulation of our already very limited public home care and long-term care services at a time when we actually need to be investing in them. So I'd like to leave off today with some acknowledgements, and the people to thank are not all on this slide because really there are too many. The Care Economies in Context project was funded by Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, Open Society Foundations, the Hewlett Foundation, and the University of Toronto. Was led, as I mentioned, by Dr. Ito Peng. My own doctoral funding also contributed to this project, which I received from SSHRC, an Ontario Graduate Scholarship, and also the University of Toronto. As I mentioned before, I did not collect this data on my own. We're an incredible team, so thank you. They're in the room today to Zuminiki and Pelengul. Mimi Michelle is not here today for their interviewing, for their wisdom, for their deep and thoughtful analysis, and this research wouldn't have happened without you. The photo credits for this presentation come from the Age Without Limits Age Positive Image Library. So I just wanted to draw attention to that as well too. And that is where I will end today. My timer was different because it was from when we opened the Zoom, so I'm actually not sure, but I think I'm around my time. And I very much am excited for the Q&A and discussion to follow. Look forward to sharing and learning from you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation, Alexa. I just wanted to mention before we go on to the question and answer. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Question and answer period. Oops. Maybe I could just move this up. With a very beginning. Yeah. Before we move on to question and answer period, I just wanted to mention that as Alexa has very kindly referred me as the PI of the Care Economies in Context project, but in fact, the truth is that this project has been really supported and built by many people, many faculty at the University of Toronto as well as other places. People like Melissa Milkey, who's right here, and in other units as well. And as well with supported by our staff, Ben and Sherry, who's not here, at the Center for Global Social Policy, and a lot of graduate and undergraduate students who many of them worked as the RAs and use the data for their PhDs and writing thesis. And so I know that for the last 5 years since this project started, we actually have over 20 students working with us. Many of them as RAs, coming from sociology, also from the public policy programs, and currently we have about a dozen RAs, PhD RAs working and writing thesis on this. So it's a real big group effort. It's been a great fun to be part of this project. So with that, I would like to open the floor for questions and answers. So if for those people who are participating online, you could either raise your hand or send us question on chat, and I'll try to read them.
Should I open up the Zoom then? So you can...
Yeah.
You're gonna do that?
Yeah. Okay, so we have a question from Leah.
So maybe Ben, you could read the questions for us.
Sure. We have a hand raised for Leah.
Yeah.
So if Leah wants to unmute and she can take it.
But I mean, could we have it on here so that we can see it on the screen?
Oh,
Hi
I see.
everyone.
I'd like to be able to see them when they're talking.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah.
Hi, Leah.
Hello. Hi everyone. Nice to see you.
Oh,
Thanks so much for the presentation, Alexa and Ito. It's so great to hear from you. I remember Melissa recommended this concept, care loops, a couple of months ago working in one of my chapters. So I'm so happy to hear about care loops now. The question is, Alexa, you were talking about the peaks and plateaus. I was wondering if, like, in the interviews, were the participants referring to some sort of rewards within the caregiving process? I was wondering if you found something about rewards there, or like kind of like mainly about rewards, particularly when caregiving was kind of like normative within the family. Yeah, and like for whom that was the case. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question, and it's a super important one. We really didn't want to only focus on burdens, and so we did ask questions. I don't think we used the word rewards, but we asked about positive experiences and fulfillment, and that was definitely a topic of conversation. I actually explore it more in another of my dissertation papers than this one, but one challenge when talking about when we wanted to focus on stress, because we wanted to focus sort of on like how to better support caregivers. And so I think when you want to do that, you also are looking at the well-being, is this sort of tension of not wanting to give too much voice to fulfillment and positivity, which we know in feminist scholarship, as I know you're very well aware of, tends to then kind of center on this sort of like female self-sacrifice and this sort of giving because you want to, and can kind of decenter or shift away from implications. So yes, the short answer, that was a long-winded one, is yes, there was definitely conversations about fulfillment and reward, and we didn't ignore it. We always tried to pay attention to it. But when paying attention to, when sort of within this particular finding of peaks and plateaus, it didn't come out as much. It wasn't such a theme as, I think, because we were focused a bit on we were focused on policy, and participants knew that, and so they sort of talked more about longer term fulfillment while still being able to speak to the day-to-day challenges. And so it was a bit of a tension in the findings in terms of how to reflect and represent that. And in the actual paper, I didn't talk about it today. We do have a bit in the discussion on it. It's just sort of reminding that many caregivers are doing this out of choice, that there is fulfillment, and there's strong motivation to do this, but they would actually prefer to visit their family and to share meals with them, to laugh with them, to play games with them. What is stressful is the management, the balancing complicated systems, doing personal care tasks because a personal support worker doesn't show up. And so there was definitely fulfillment and reward. But in terms of caregiver well-being, the scorecard didn't always balance out in our findings.
Thank you. And where do you have those?
We have a question in the chat, which we can see it there.
Okay. This is from Asmita, and the question is, okay, I'll read it. Thank you for the presentation. This is an excellent and timely project. Did this research also generate findings on the bidirectional nature of care? That is, how do care recipients exhibit acts of care towards their caregivers? That's a very good question.
It is a very good question, and I really appreciate it. The short answer is yes, and again, the long answer is long. Can you actually leave where did the question go? I just like to be able to move back to it. I did write it down, but so yes, there was some discussion of bidirectional nature of care. Reciprocity is a big theme in the care literature. We, first of all, methodologically, it's hard to speak to that because we didn't interview care recipients. And so what I would love to do in future research is more dyadic interviews in which we interview both together and separately, both people who are receiving care, and I say receiving with caution, because very much so there's this reciprocity in terms of both in the current moment and giving back. There's a lot of evidence from care scholarship that people do this work to give back to their parents. In fact, another paper within the same one that I was just referring to with Leah is really related to motivations and reciprocity that comes out of this same project. So it didn't fit as well into this exploration of stress. Again, I don't think we saw that motives and feelings of positive, like this is sort of answering both these questions, that reciprocity and motivation for care, and I've also found like these findings of like duty and giving back that didn't seem to impact caregiver stress. So it impacts why people want to do it. It impacts, many of our participants were able to say, like, long term, I'm not going to have any regrets. Like, I'm doing this because I want to. It's the right thing to do. It's the way I've been raised. But I think for this paper, where we're looking specifically at stress and caregiver well-being, I don't think there was evidence that your motives reduced your stress. So you can want to do something, you can know that it's right, you can know that you're not going to have regrets, but it's still really hard. And so all of that, the reciprocity, and then to get back to the second part of the question about these acts of care, feeling appreciated by the person you were caring for. Or, I got to my mom's house and she still insists of making me a cup of tea, even though it's hard for her to get up. Like, yes, there was definitely that. And it was important for caregivers in terms of their motives and why they felt good about doing it. But I don't think it reduced stress, if that sort of answers it. It's like, yes, it is important. It definitely makes it easier in a motivation sense to care if you feel appreciated for, but it's still hard. And you still are balancing your work and your life and these complicated systems. And so I think all of those, the positivity and the rewards and the reciprocity are embedded in a caring, longer term relationship, but it doesn't necessarily make things easier for caregiver well-being in the short term.
That's great. We just got a sort of just saying.
Okay, thank you. It was a bit long-winded, but I really appreciate the question. Thanks.
I just want to mention there are a couple of other students who are writing theses based on dyadic interviews of care. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting research, and you'll be really great with this more sort of research on this. Ben, are you that?
Yes.
Maybe we could. There's a few questions in person. So
yeah, great talk. So I wonder is so in this kind of caregiving situation, it seems like based on interview, there's in many situations there's only one primary caregiver, even when there are maybe multiple choice, multiple opinions. So I wonder why there's always often there's only one primary caregiver. Why it's hard to coordinate between various caregivers? Because this can potentially reduce stress.
Yes.
Absolutely. So this is more kind of organization perspective. This what cause in many situations there's only one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, and that was interesting. Well, so I'll speak also like about the recruitment as I mentioned in the original survey, we asked for a primary unpaid caregiver, and many of them were primary, but they had siblings. So those siblings were doing other things, or they had a spouse. Additionally, they may have been doing the care management, financial management, logistics related to home, but might not have been doing the day-to-day personal care. Sometimes that was a person like personal support workers, either unpaid. And so care management, there's a I'm working on another project with Dr. Laura Funk at the University of Manitoba, who's written quite extensively on system navigation, that this is a really intensive part of the work, is negotiating with the long-term care home, negotiating with either the personal support workers directly, or a management company that sends the personal support workers to you. And so very much, and others, Ito has written on this, and Pat Armstrong, about the patchwork nature of our care system in Canada. And then also the complex relationships with other family was a big part of this too. So somebody might be like the primary caregiver from the family, but their brother like sometimes it would be like a sibling, not necessarily a brother, often a brother. We had a lot of women in our sample, but would there'd be other siblings who didn't want to move the senior into long-term care. And so there'd have to be tensions in the family between and the primary caregiver. It's not like a job appointment. It's how someone sees themselves. It's an identity. And perhaps there was another person in the family who thought they were caring equally as much, right? Like it's really just how that person saw themselves, and may shift over time. Like somebody moves away, and then another sibling has to step up and take over, or like one of the spouses was doing more of the care work and the day-to-day for an aging senior, and then that senior has a fall and can't do the work, and so their children have to step up. So it's very much a non-static situation, and so we defined care quite broadly, and this primary caregiver was sometimes only primary for a certain period of time, then not always.
Yeah, so my question is more about whether this system is set up by choice or by constraints.
It's a very good question. Yeah, I think I don't think it's a system, maybe. That's part of it's more just something that happens. And some people might choose it. Some people might say, like, I'm going to look after my mom because she looked after me, and so that's my duty, and I'm going to do that. And other people might be like, my siblings don't live in this province, and so it's on me, or they're an only child. And so I think that, and actually in some of the other research that came out of this project, I think I did work on and looked into this sense of duty. And often one of the components of duty was there's no one else. No one else is going to do it. And so duty might, and circumstance might be the reason why somebody becomes the primary caregiver. And so, yeah, I think it's very circumstantial. It's sometimes by choice, and sometimes by chance, and other times a bit of both. But it's a great question. Yeah, it's a very because it came out of our recruitment, and it's a very kind of like quantitative term, primary caregiver. And then when we got into the qualitative interviews, we were like, this is not one type of caregiver. Like, we have a lot of different caregivers here. They're doing a lot of different things. And so it was interesting that they all identified as primary caregiver when they were really quite different, which I actually think is like some of the insights from the qual. Like, that's why mixed methods projects are so interesting and can generate such interesting results.
I have Pearlin and Melissa.
Not a question, but I think a kind of follow-up addition from one of the interviewers, because like you were asking about the system, right? And it in fact I think looked like a system, because like a lot of people, like some people, even though they were in our mind, even in their stories, were not the primary caregiver, they thought themselves as primary caregiver.
Yeah.
And that was, of course, obviously most of them being men. And for them it was a natural process that the caregiving fall under the sister, right? So, but I am doing whatever, like the rhetoric is that, I'm doing whatever I'm able to do because I have my wife, I have my kids. I can't convince my parents to come live near us, but did you really try? It's just like, it sounds like people, especially those who were not really the primary caregiver, didn't do the most, thinking that was the natural process. Of course, if it were me, I would do the same, but there are these constraints kind of. Yeah, because I just want to say there's like an excellent presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, and there is a gender section in the paper, but the constraints of today, I think it's really important to recognize that what what some people saw as primary caregiver was not the same as others, for sure.
So I'm going to ask, I know Melissa is next, and then after that, I also see the hands from Emanuela Christiansen. So Melissa and then Emanuela.
Yeah, I'm just building off this first. It would be interesting to get people's accounts, right? And not just the say primary caregiver, but then their siblings say, or other natural people. And then just talk about this idea of choice, right? Because it's so, the word is so loaded to me because, you know, in this and in other research, like what choice do we have? You know, similar with mothers like quitting their jobs, like, hey, I chose to do that, but really, you know, like there's the wage gap and there's, you know, all these structural things. that make it likely that the woman's going to reduce her pay for caregiving for a child, or even for the elder. In fact, I was just looking at an article on caregiving. It just came out or something, on reduced work hours based on caregiving for
Persons,
It might have been in conjunction with Leah Acosta's work
Yeah.
that I'm working with her as well. Project, which has got some overlaps, but my question, and forgive me, because I know Pearlin's work really.
And Melissa's been a big help with this paper. I know
We're good to have experts on Pearlin's.
I actually co-taught him back at Maryland. Just worked with him for a while, but so this is really for the publication, right? That and you're thinking of it, and you mentioned that you said your words were stress, that the stress process model suggests that stress will increase if it's not buffered. And I thought I'm not sure, like it's interesting because he'll talk about stress proliferation in relation to the caregiver role. The stress process model itself is very static and it doesn't really talk about, you know, again, he may in one or two publications, but I thought it was interesting that you said that. And when I layered that onto what you present as your findings, those three categories, the peaks and plateaus and the care loops, which are sort of different than the chronic stress. And he's really, his arena is chronic stress. And so I feel like in chronic stress, that's where the stress proliferation is happening, and where he does talk about that primary stressor, not just the physical labor of caring for the person or their daily living issues, but also then role overload and burden, increasing burden, like I'm trapped in this role. And then the secondary stressors that you mentioned, like work family conflict or whatever. But I guess as a reviewer, I would push you in terms of this peaks and plateaus and care loops, which I don't have in front of me, all the details, but I've seen before, but I think those are really linked, and you did allude to the sandwich generation, but you can talk about peaks and plateaus when raising children, right? You're gonna have, you know, everything's smooth, and then, you know, the kid has a health issue or you move or something, and then it's very similar. I think that normal periods in between stressful periods. But the chronic part is different, and I mean, parents of kids with disabilities might feel trapped and feel. So I guess I'd like to push you to push the theory, like stress process model, as your implications potentially, if that makes sense to you in this submission, and just really focus on that if you can, and making those links. And I'll talk.
No, that is so great. And Melissa has been a huge theoretical resource for me in this paper because she was on my dissertation committee, and so I was often like, am I getting it right? And she'd always be like, not quite, but keep going. And I think we're getting there. But
I was really actually fascinated by this connection. I think that you're pointing out, but about the peaks and plateaus and how that might be also applicable, right, to other caregiving. In a way more so than, you know, those chronic people who the person's getting worse and worse. The care recipient, where kids, it's less likely they could at any time though go into a bad situation. Anyhow, I just.
Yeah, no,
it's
that-
food for
it-
thought.
I've taken lots of notes and I'm gonna go
Okay.
back and read the paper in that light, but just sort of briefly now, I think absolutely the third category, those who are chronically stressed, like they sort of reflect the stress process model more. And that's,
Yeah,
you know, sometimes the finding is in the absence. And so that was it, is like we didn't see it in most people. And so we wanted to note, and Pearlin's work is really often with people with caring for those with chronic conditions.
Yeah.
And I think we were asking, like, is aging a chronic condition? Like, in what way is aging, does it mirror the same patterns? And some of his work was like, it began with care for AIDS, like care for AIDS patients, like people in
Right.
really,
Yeah.
really like palliative situations. But then he's done quite a bit of work with people with Alzheimer's, which will be more similar with our population. And so I think, I think the peaks and plateaus finding was just interesting to us. We were kind of like, what's different there?
Right.
Why are they not in chronic stress? And the answer really was often service access or unpaid care support from family. Or, as you note, reduced work hours. And we saw that much more in women, especially in the 60 to 65 range. They were like, you know what? I'm just going to retire early. Like, early retirement was a really key stress reduction strategy. And sometimes it was in between the sequential multiple care. So it's like they'd gone through it while working with one parent. And then they were like, you know what? This is going to happen to mom or dad pretty soon. I'm 61. I can afford it. I'm going to retire early or reduce work hours, right? And I think I'd have to go back to check, but I think we had one man who retired early and many women. Like, I'd want to look at the exact numbers before saying them, but definitely it was a gendered pattern. And so I think it's interesting from life course theory. Life course theory often looks at, one sec, just like cumulative disadvantages. And so if you're taking time off when you're raising kids, but then you're also doing it at the other end of your career to support your parents, we know that's going to impact your OAS or your CPP, right? In Canada, your for international viewers, like that's sort of like how your pension is your government pension is calculated. And so I think I've seen other work on that, and I'll end there. We can chat later. Thank you, Melissa.
No, this is a great conversation. I'm so glad. But I know also.
Yeah. Thank you for keeping us in line. Yes.
There are questions, so I'll pass that back. Next, Emanuela, please.
Thank you. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm joining from Scotland, new to your Care Work network, really interested in your work, Alexa. Thank you today. But I just was curious to hear how has there been any work towards, because it sounds like a big project, has there been work on looking at the financial costs? So my PhD work is looking at the monetary aspects, and I'm trying to do not the same, not at all. This is really interesting, detailed work, but I'm looking at the cost of depletion, trying to put like a financial number on it, and then trying to get the Scottish government to sort of understand the costs of care. And at this point, it's so basic, but your work is so in depth. And I'm just wondering, to what extent is there cross-comparative work in other countries? And to what extent, secondly, is there a discussion on those stress process models into a monetary aspect? So those were sort of my two very just trying to understand your work more. Thank you.
I think those are excellent questions, and your work sounds super interesting as well too. Thanks for joining us from Scotland. This data was the qualitative data, and we did pay attention to whether individuals quit jobs or had financial implications, but within this conceptualization, it was really as that secondary stressor, like how it contributed to their stress. However, the project is a larger project with definitely goals to deal with the financial costs. And I actually wonder if Ito wants to talk a little more about that, because you know the up-to-date sort of details.
So thank you very much for raising that question. So this project actually, as Alexa said, is much larger project that really looks at the that tries to calculate and map out paid and unpaid care work that's been done for children one set, and for older people, another set, and using that data to develop macroeconomic models of the care economies in 9 different countries. Too bad Ireland isn't part of it, yeah, so we started in 2021 and we've been collecting, I had to collect empirical data first. Because in order to develop macroeconomic models, we need not only time use survey, general household survey, labor force survey, but because we wanted we don't want to have that sort of traditional World Bank type of mainstream macroeconomic model. We want very gender sensitive macroeconomic model. We decided that for each of the countries, we will also do large nationally representative surveys of paid and unpaid care work for children and then for older people. That's why we did that large end survey, followed by pretty detailed interview surveys for each of these categories of people. We are now in the macro phase, so we're actually quantifying and finding the cost of cost and benefit of the sort of paid and unpaid caregiving in each of these countries. We just finished the first draft of the macro economic model for Canada. So we're just reviewing that, and we have a team of macroeconomists and modelers who are working on it. So we finished Canada. We're currently working on Mongolia, and then Sri Lanka, and Colombia, and Senegal coming up next. So it's very interesting. We'll be happy to share, information and result with you if you're interested.
Yeah, and if you're on the
sounds great.
If you're on the CGSP mailing list, then you'll get notifications about publications, and hopefully something will come out at some point. So, you know how long these things take, within the next couple of years.
Yes. Any other questions?
Yes, one last question. So, in terms of policy implication, you talk about giving this a timely intervention. Again, I think about constraint, and so do you think is money support more efficient, or free care services efficient to reduce stress?
Yeah, I mean, this is the constant question in sort of like social policy, and especially care social policy. Like, and I don't have any easy solutions, but I think monetary support can be very helpful. It's often provided in the Canadian context in the form of like tax credits, and some caregiver organizations advocate strongly for it, and I think there's a lot of pros. There's some challenges to tax credits as well too, in that they can often miss those in the lowest socio economic deciles, and that they may not be paying taxes and so they don't get the tax credits at all. And also monetary support from like a feminist political economic perspective is often questioned, in that if, this ties to sort of Melissa's comments earlier, that like if there's financial incentive to stay home, it's very often the woman in a household who makes that choice. And so feminists often, but feminist social policy scholars often push back and caution against that. In long-term care policy development in Korea and Japan and Germany, which are often held as the gold standards, there's kind of this debate as to whether there should be these cash for care schemes to caregivers. Japan decided against it. Is that correct, Izumi? Yeah, and Korea kind of has a bit of a mixed scheme. Germany, remember Germany, did they do cash for care, or they decided against?
They do. So their long-term care insurance is sort of both cash and care.
Yeah, and so it's challenging, and I think it really ties into our findings, which is that the peaks and plateaus shows that everybody experiences stress and timely intervention matters. And the chronic stress and the socioeconomic ties of socioeconomic status show that we do also need to support those caregivers who are struggling the most. So I am constantly unsure. To be honest, I know we need a long-term care insurance and a national long-term care program, but I also am a realist in terms of how the length of time and the negotiation between provinces would work in our federal system. And so sometimes I'm like, no, we need to support these really, really struggling caregivers, but also universal programs from a social policy perspective have been found to be more cost effective and more equitable and offer better quality service provision. That's why we went with a national child care program. And that's why I think ultimately we do need a national senior care program.
If I could just add one thing, one of our partner institutions, CCCE, or Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, is a large national NGO. They are really kind of trying to advocate for national long-term care insurance in Canada. They are working very hard on it. Yeah. So just letting you know. I have another question. This is coming from Terry Norway. I should read it, even though it's on the screen. He or she says, this is an extremely interesting and important discussion, and I really appreciate all that went into the research. I am wondering if in your interviews and discussions with regard to care loops, you touched upon the situation of going from intense care with one senior to the extent that the rest of the caregiver's life is on hold, moving to the situation of the seniors passing and then addressing more care to a second senior who doesn't need it. Same level of care, but does need care. The flux of not being able to get back to one's own life, for example, can't go back to work or school, can't make long-term plans, but not needing to devote the same level of care right now, while anticipating what is to come, is a particular unsettled feeling in itself. Has this discussion played out? Is this part of the peak? Is this part of the peaks and plateau?
Yes, thank you for this detailed and very thoughtful question, Terry. I absolutely this played out. I can think of a couple cases or who this would apply to. You know, from a findings perspectives, we were obviously looking for kind of more commonalities pattern, and that applied to some, but not all. But from sort of the theoretical contributions component, what this ties to is the anticipation of the future. And very often within that the care loops patterning, we did see worries. Is it going to be this bad again? Is this like that was really challenging? And I think that really was in one of the cases I featured in the presentation. Like we provided palliative care for my dad, and we're glad we did, and I have no regrets. But at the same time, I don't think we can do that again. Like it's just there were just too many challenges, and some of that part of I think both the value of this research, but also the challenge in it, as with all qualitative research, is it's kind of messy. So you're finding these few patterns at the end, but really it's messy. The stories were messy. They were all different. But I think one point that I wasn't able to make as much in this presentation, but is in the paper that's going to publication, is that care loops and peaks and plateaus are not mutually exclusive. So I think I can't remember the exact subheadings, but in the paper we talk about a care loop. We talk about a care loop example with peaks and plateaus, and then we talk about a care loop example with chronic stress. So care loops can be both. These are not mutually exclusive patterns or situations. And so some people cared for one parent, they passed, and then they were like, okay, I know the services, I know the numbers to call. We got on the wait list early this time. I'm retiring from work early. I'm kind of like planning for the future and know it's going to be hard, but we're sort of setting up these systems within our family to get ready for the others. Whereas other individuals, really, it was such an emotional and physical and challenging experience to care for one senior that they just really felt like we have to do something different in the second or third circumstance. So yeah, absolutely yes is the answer to your question. And I think that's why this is bringing in that life course concept is important, because it reminds that it's not just about your current care, but what you've done in the past and how that shapes your current experiences and decisions. So I hope that answered, and thank you so much for the question, Giele.
Thank you very much. We are actually running. Oh, there's one more question.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry. Okay, so this will be the last question. Thank you very much for asking, Terry. But where is the next question?
That was the last one. It's just.
Oh, that was the last one. Okay, thank you very much. And well, with this, I think our time is up. And I just want to thank everybody, both those who are here in person, as well as everybody who participated virtually. This has been a really excellent, excellent presentation by Alexa, but really excellent conversations and questions from everybody. So I really appreciate that. So thank you very much. And we will announce the next seminar, upcoming seminar. So stay on in tune from email from us. And if you have any ideas about seminars, if you want to present, let us know, and we'll try our best to accommodate. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
That was great. Excellent.
Maybe a lot.